have a remarkable professional who understands procurement and trade dynamics from inside out. She's amazing. Please welcome our moderator, Ms. Botswana, who is the procurement specialist at Water Utilities Corporation. With expertise in sourcing, governance, and supply chain transformation, she's uniquely positioned to guide this conversation in inclusion, opportunity, and equitable participation. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause as she makes her way to the stage. Ms. Botswana, over to you.
Hello everyone. I kind of don't do well with reserved round of applause. I like applause, so one more time, give it up for me, please. Also, the women that I'm going to be sitting here with are remarkable women, and I'm pretty confident that you are going to clap and clap and clap. So ours is a conversation on youth and women inclusion, which is something that is not too far-fetched, or it's a conversation that we hold every now and then. So in the era that we are in, the digital era, everybody knows that social media is close to us. Online platforms, learning platforms. We also have e-commerce platforms. Shein, they say, I know we use Shein, we use Amazon, we use eBay. So the digital platforms are quite important to our generation. This is why we also have seen the proliferation of podcasts and people sharing information on different platforms. And I am one of those people. Right now, as we are speaking, we are live on Conversations in Supply Chain. That is a podcast that I'm running. And the ladies that I have today, I want to chill with them here and talk all women and youth inclusion. So these women are amazing. I'm not going to take from their bio. I want them to take us through their journey, their experiences. So as I'm standing here, I met Mr. Gekhaitse when I was 23. And our first engagement, he asked me, so what are your plans? Like, what do you want to do? I told him, I just want to buy a car. That's all I want. And he looked at me with so much shock and I think a bit of disappointment, but hidden disappointment because he's a parent. And he said, I think you might have aspirations. So that's what I'm asking about. What do you want to do? And then I said, I'll think about it and get back to you. And then 3 years later, I came to him and said, oh, actually, I'm starting a podcast. So when I see this theme, impact, integrate, and innovate, I said, oh, this is more like him. He's likely to ask, what about impact? Like, what are you doing? I get the car part, but what are we doing in the field? So join me in conversation as we are going to have an impactful conversation with these two beautiful women as they tell us about their journey in entrepreneurship, in supply chain, and many other more things. Another round of applause.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Bafaiso. I am a co-founder and CEO at Elena Zava Research Lab, which is a deep tech company that I started with my husband, who is a software engineer and an AI expert. So our journey in the company, we make assistive technologies for persons with visual impairments. Specifically, currently, our offerings target individuals with visual impairments and those that are fully blind. We have a mobile application called Revision, which is currently live on Google Play Store, and we are currently developing our smart glasses. Essentially, what they will do is they will help a blind person to interact with their environment in their local native languages.
So basically with Believe Vision, they want you to feel loved, included, and seen. So she's gonna carry on and explain to us how the AI tool, I must call it, works. So over to Ms. Neka. Ms. Neka is a SAPICS Director and also G20 Empower Alliance advocate. So over to you, tell us about your journey. How did you get into G20? What is G20?
Thank you very much for that. So what a pleasure and an honor to be a part of the Botswana Supply Chain Summit. And it's always encouraging when I'm in forums with like-minded individuals. As a seasoned supply chain specialist, of which almost 24 years in the field, deeply rooted in streamlining operations and business development. I was the former head of business development for BP in Africa, and a big advocate for women in the supply chain space, simply because as I started navigating my journey many years ago, supply chain or transport economics or the logistics spaces were never quite designed for people that looked like me. So stepping into a space from whether we heard our previous speakers speak around in a warehouse in PPE was very different for a young female. And as I navigated my career within BP, I found opportunities to do a few things. One was focus around education, because I believed through education we empower, we find alternatives, we build resilience. The second was once I found my seat at the table, because very often we hear about building tables and finding seats, but actually there's an unconscious bias of actually you don't belong. So you need to, as females, start to build and create spaces for other women. So I started to advocate for women empowerment in the supply chain space, but also was invited onto the board of the UNISA, which is the University of South Africa, in the supply chain space to make sure that curriculums that were being offered around supply chain was industry relevant. Your question around G20, we all should be proud on the African continent that South Africa gets to host the G20 this year. What an incredible opportunity, because this is truly about our legacy of making a difference. And I was invited at the beginning of this year to be part of the Empower Alliance to advocate, because of the work that I did around mentorship, women inclusion, financial inclusion, to lead the G20 survey for corporate South Africa, for Africa, and G20 countries. And out of the G20 will come what we refer to as the best practices across G20 countries. And it's about giving people an understanding as to what are the gaps in terms of bringing women online into the right spaces. It's about creating sustainable financial inclusion. And we should be proud because we get to tell our story in the playbook that gets handed over to the US at the summit in November.
Happy. So I want to go back to you, Victoria. You know, there's been a surge that we need to include young people in forums, in platforms, and give them a chance. And it was surrounded, or still is surrounded, with a lot of positive and negative connotations. Some say it should be just about marriage, it should be just about this. But I wanted to find out from you, why do you think youth and women inclusion is important in terms of strategy rather than just social advocacy?
Right, thank you for that. So I think I want to frame this through maybe an example. So if you think about a farmer that has two fields, right? And then one field, it's a field that he has been using for a very long time and he's comfortable with the harvest that comes out of it. It's only a small fraction, but it's okay, right? But it doesn't feed a nation. And then you have another field, the second field. It's a fertile field, but he's never used it. So occasionally he goes when it's summer and he waters it because it's nice to have. I think currently this is the narrative that we have, where we look at women in youth inclusion as a nice to have CSR policies, not something that we thoroughly give our hearts and soul into by saying, when we empower a youth or a woman, we are not just unlocking potential. We're unlocking potential that is highly underutilized, that could equally unlock more of the harvest if you just put more time and energy into equipping them and ensuring that the same resources that we give to men and older people, we put some of that towards women. For me, as a young entrepreneur and also being a woman in a male-dominated industry, I tend to find that opportunities that come that fuel me instead of giving me the money are the ones that tend to produce more results than the nice to have, take the $5,000 US, do something with it. So, yeah.
Then you, Ms. Nika, what do you think inclusion looks like in the logistics sector? You said when you started going into the warehouse, the environment wasn't really looking or hoping to see somebody like you. Can you go into it? What does inclusion for women look like in the logistics sector?
Thank you for the question. And quite rightly so. When you're starting off your field in supply chain, I certainly, if I had to be honest, did not quite understand the depth and breadth and the impact that I would have in the energy space. Starting off my career with BP in aviation, didn't quite also understand my role in keeping aviation across South Africa and Africa in full on time. So our very basic concepts and principles steps in. But then when you start to walk into airports, sitting, in your PPE, people look at you kind of, this is not your space. You're generally either considered to be the EA, the PA, or the person there to take minutes. And that did not for 1 second deter my want to be successful. Because I realized I had a responsibility to change the narrative. I had a responsibility to be able to make a difference. To give you an example, I wanted to change the narrative that said I was the only or the first. And I think very often people get caught up in saying, I'm proudly the only. And if we are truly, and again to what what our speaker said, is we need to create inclusive environments because we shouldn't be the one or the only. We should be able to lift as we rise. And as I went into running, I was part of a design team for a centralized warehousing and distribution facility, and I then subsequently ran that for South Africa and Africa. And some of the very early on comments was, she's too young, and then she's too female, because you're starting to work with multinationals and leading transport companies, implementing driving safety standards across Africa. You're speaking to bulk vehicle drivers who have a view, well, actually, you don't actually know what it takes to drive a bulk vehicle. So you need to understand the nuances. I was also the first female to lead BP's biggest bulk fuels terminal. And as you can imagine, a high-risk environment, 24/7, and for those of you familiar with South Africa, based in an island in Durban, with a very dominant Indian culture and a very dominant Zulu culture, and neither one of them respects women in those spaces. And for me, one of the things was to be able to connect hearts and minds with strategy. Because I realized, like me, everyone wants to succeed. Everyone gets up wanting to be successful, and we needed to create the right culture. I was fortunate that I had leaders who believed in me showing up, who mentored, who coached, which is also talks about the culture of the organizations that we affiliate ourselves with, is to ask for mentorship. Never be too afraid to say, I don't know. Never be too afraid to say that that space was not designed for me, but we can actually navigate that journey. And as I went on to do that, I found that the harder I worked, the more I took people onto my journey with me, the better we collectively succeeded. And I think that's the responsibility as women, is creating a sisterhood. Because when we create this, we don't just move little steps. we actually create movements that comes through with generational curses of spaces that were not built for us. It's about creating platforms that says, with the right support structures, we heard a little bit earlier about financing, we move the financial bias or the unconscious bias about collateral, making the credit process a lot more streamlined. We create the spaces that enables women to actually get mentored and sponsored and have their voices in rooms that they're not in.
A round of applause, please. Okay, so she was talking about the unconscious biasness in financing. And, businesses thrive on finance. It's not something that we can ignore. Yes, we need to be capacitated in bookkeeping, in many other things, customer service and the like, but we also need finance to expand. So, Khuzane, how hard was it for you to access finance and other markets in this space?
Right. So it's been a wild journey, if I'm to say. But our strategy was not to look for finances from home first, because we realized that unfortunately in Botswana there's this bias where before you get funded or recognized by some international company, it's very hard for you to get support here locally. So instead of sitting down and crying about that, we pivoted our strategy and started internationally before we came back home. So what we did was we targeted grants, because unfortunately for our work, working with marginalized communities, you find that it's an industry where even if you're a for-profit company, you're expected to give out the product as something that is free. So you need to solicit grants, solicit partnerships with people who are already doing what you're trying to do. So our first round of funding, our pre-seed funding, was from Mastercard Foundation, and they were very impactful in giving us that fund. That fund opened up opportunities for us to hire staff and to also patent our innovation, making us not just one of the first in Botswana, but the only company in Botswana that directly services individuals with homegrown solutions in Botswana for assistive technology, which is a market that is very fragmented in Africa as a whole. So it was not an easy job, but pivot when you have to. That's what I would say.
I guess, ladies and gentlemen, entrepreneurs in tech here, you got the strategy. So she just gave away her strategy, which we might take and go and employ in our own spaces. So I want to go back to you, Ms. Nneka. So we have this Empower Alliance, thing that I want you to explain to us, and particularly what are the gender responsive platforms or projects that have you engaged in that you can tell us about the results or how far we've come on such, but particularly highlighting Alliance Empower.
Excellent. So it's a very good question because, as I said, we all should take pride in the fact that the Empower Alliance on behalf of G20 for South Africa and the G20 countries is going to showcase the best practices on the continent. So that's one example. But how do you actually do that? And through the course of this morning, you've heard conversations about data and the integrity of data. Unless we know our nuances within our different countries, we actually can't correct them. So I've been very privileged to lead the G20 survey, which is really kind of underpinning what is corporates doing to be able to promote financial inclusion, to talk around cultural diversity initiatives, but also back to education and how do we empower our female leaders within our organizations with pipeline growth. Now, education for me is actually quite something I'm passionate about, and I think passionate because it's not been an easy journey. So whilst I sit here at the risk of giving away my age, I've had a very successful 30-year career, of which, again, very blessed to have started off working under the Nelson Mandela Reconstruction and Development Program, which focused around funding schools so that we could inspire children to be able to go to school. And so it's come full circle because education is the key to being able to make the change. One of the outcomes that we're expecting from the survey is to be able to make policy recommendations that will be underpinned by strategic initiatives, not just in the private sector, but the public sector as well, but also to be able to showcase a board leadership program for South Africa will be onboarded by the G20 countries. Because we need to be in spaces where we can make those necessary changes. At the same time, when you ask the question about what are the alliances doing, one of the key things is we have to recognize as women, we generally juggle at least 3 or 4 different types of roles. So my proudest achievement is that I am a mom of 3 beautiful children, having navigated my entire academic career part-time whilst full-time working. And that in itself brings a lot of nuances, how do you balance where you provide your time and effort. And so one of the things that I've actually advocated to do was to partner with the Management School of Southern Africa to offer 2 things. Is a mentorship and coaching program for their graduates coming in so that they can be better equipped when they actually step into the real spaces of work. And the second is this year, created a program for the Management School of Southern Africa around women empowerment and leadership. And one of the results is that you start to hear the stories that women in certain spaces, without being given the right environment, stop pursuing their own want for growth. They stop pursuing that ambition. And yet if we remember, women raise families. Women build up communities. So if we give them the right platform within our organizations, within the industry, within the policy-making places where these decisions are really thought of, and if we can contextualize that with actual data that says this is where we really need to be. Because through research, the National Framework for South Africa, and we're talking 30 years into democracy, saying we still only have 26.5% of our females sitting in C-suite leadership, which means the narrative needs to change. And the importance of the G20 Empower Alliance is we're privileged to host G20 for Africa. It would be sad that when G20 comes around the next time around, in 15, 16 years, if we're having the same conversation. Because we should not be having conversations about women empowerment. It should be a competitive normal. We should be creating platforms where women have the same spaces. Because truthfully, and in my experience, women are expected to lead as if they do not nurture, and then we're expected to nurture as if we don't have deadlines. So you're constantly having to find the sweet spot. And I think collectively we have an equal role and responsibility to show up for each other. And I think the Alliance does that. It allows for great stories to be told. Because it's great to have academic research that I'm busy with. It's great to read the statistics, but then if we do nothing about that, and what's going to change is if we take the lived experiences of women, challenges as you've outlined, in being able to pivot, because we're constantly pivoting, right? And so if we could change that narrative and create enabling environments, we actually change one woman, because they change a generation that follows behind them. And that's what we need to do. And as a proud mom of 2, I want to make sure that my 2 daughters actually don't have to fight the battle or step away from the battle because it's too hard. So we need to start creating enabled. And each of us has a role and a responsibility to do that.
Wonderful. Okay, so I think we're almost out of time, but we're wrapping up, and I wanted to come back to you, Zonia. You know, she has developed a powerful tool, ladies and gentlemen, and clearly she was trying to do something, bridge a gap, And I want you to tell us, what were you trying to achieve with this tool? What generational gaps were you trying to achieve? What inclusivity and platforms were you trying to create, and for who?
All right, thank you. So I think maybe what you need to know is that globally, there's 2.2 billion people that have some form of visual impairment. I'm one of those. And then in Africa alone, 5.9 million are blind, and Botswana, 15 million are blind, right? So you find that what is happening currently, individuals with visual impairments or those who are fully blind, severe visual impairments, in Botswana, they have specialized schools that they are taken to. And when they are there, there's limited resources. They are unable to equally access mainstream education. And when you talk about mainstream education, we're talking about the same classroom that you and I have the opportunity to interact with multiple students in the same classroom with, right? They are segregated. What Revision does is that it takes students who have been pushed away to access education at their own pace back into the mainstream education, allowing them to feel like their needs are not being treated as a privilege. Because access isn't a privilege, it's a right. So Revision then bridges the gap of unequal access to quality education for students that have visual impairments or those that are fully blind. And one thing you should know is that this is not just a social problem. Just like the exclusion of women and youth from workforce or entrepreneurship isn't a social problem only, the government of Botswana loses around 38 million every year because they lose so much in productivity loss by not including individuals that have visual impairments. Thank you.
Wow, another last round of applause. So thank you, ladies. I want to go over to the delegates. Just one question, we are out of time. Anyone who has a question for our remarkable women? Yes, there's one hand over there.
I have a question for Ms. Huizonekao Mazidede. You talked about the challenges that you encountered when you were in the country to an extent that you had to go and get grants outside. Can you tell us a bit about that journey and how can you give me a guide as someone who also wants to start something?
Okay, thank you for that. So basically what we did was I had a beautiful opportunity to be an alumni of the Young Leaders Initiative by USAID. And through joining such initiatives, I was given a unique opportunity to apply for certain grants, right? Now, for you to be able to maybe obtain such, you need to also be willing to learn how to use AI at your advantage. You should know how to prompt AI to give you, or it should be able to help you to frame your responses or your business ideas in a way that communicates not just I'm here to take your money, but I will leave an impact for business or solution. So what we are doing, we have a program under the company called Destiny's Change, from seedling to seed. And what we do through this, we help individuals, youth that want to start businesses and look for funding. We link them with the opportunities that we have benefited from, and then we also teach them AI skills and financial literacy just for them to be able to know how to channel that into proper businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Sorry, can I just add something to that for the question? One of the most important things that you need to do as you start to navigate this journey is the importance of being able to network and be in the right platform. So platforms like this, the Botswana Supply Summit, SAPEX, or your professional bodies that governs your speciality, creates platforms for you to be networked, for you to be in spaces where you can connect and understand what have been success factors, how to navigate hurdles, but also to be able to provide mentorship. As a board director of SAPEX, it's something we take pride in, is being able to mentor graduates coming in. So don't underestimate the value of intentional networking.
Okay, so we need to create a culture of mentorship. Thank you, ladies. You are wonderful, and I enjoyed this conversation with them. And thank you to our delegates. This brings us to the end of our session. I guess we all agree in this room that women and youth are at the center of transformation of Africa's supply chains. Can I get an applause if we are?